What can improv do for you? As well as being a therapist and embodiment coach, I also teach improvised comedy. So I thought I would share some perspectives on what you can get from engaging in improvised comedy on a personal level, both in terms of how it can nourish you and support you, which I like to think of as the roots, like the roots of a tree, but also how it can stretch you and give you an opportunity to grow. And perhaps the first distinction that can be helpful here is to think of improvised comedy by analogy with dancing. So in the world of dancing, you can be a performer, like you might be a ballet dancer, or you might be in a Broadway show. And when you're doing that part of dancing, the main purpose of it is to create effects in the audience who've paid to come and see it. But then there's also another kind of dancing, which is you dancing in the kitchen with your child, or if you're frustrated, putting on some music and like getting it all out of your system, or going to a 5 rhythms class to practice becoming more expressive and getting in touch with your feelings. And in those cases, it doesn't matter what it looks like. There is no audience. You're doing it for its own sake. This is like the experience of dancing and what you can get from doing it. And improvised comedy is the same, that there is a performance aspect, which is wonderful, where you can see shows and you can perform shows. And that's one beautiful, wonderful thing. There's also the experience of doing it for its own sake, regardless of what it looks like to anybody else. And for me, this is the most interesting bit. And it's also something that's perhaps not obvious, because in everyday life, we see examples of dancing on stage and dancing for ourselves. We see examples sometimes of improvised comedy being performed on stage, but what we generally don't see is the experience of doing it for its own sake and exploring it there. But that, I think, is where the personal benefits can lie. Actually, like for me, I don't really care what it looks like on the outside. I'm much more interested in what my participants are discovering for themselves on the inside, like where it's bringing them joy, where it's helping them discover new things inside themselves. That's much more important to me. And actually letting go of what it looks like on the outside and whether anybody else is enjoying it is sometimes part of the practice, when we stop looking for approval outside and we start doing something for its own sake rather than to get approval or a gold star from external sources. So that's the first little distinction about noticing how it can be a personal practice. And then I want to offer some ways in which it can be a nourishment and a support in life, and then we'll move on to where it can be an opportunity for growth as well. So in terms of nourishment, I've thought of 4 like main areas. The first is laughter. So laughing is good for you. We don't take it seriously enough. It's like it helps you relax, it makes you feel good, you bond with other people. It's a healthy, good thing to do. And yet we are 30 times more likely to laugh in the company of others than by ourselves. So if you compare watching a DVD of a comedian by yourself at home, and you're watching the show by yourself at home, notice how much you laugh then versus if you went to see them, the same show in real life with 500 other people there. you laugh much more, right, with the other people, and it's a full body experience. By yourself, it can be like, but it's not. It doesn't get deep, because laughing is a social thing. It's mainly not about someone being clever or funny. It's mainly about, even in the case of comedians, look at the difference in the two contexts. And in improvised comedy, we're not even trying to be funny. What makes it funny is the discovery and the stepping into the unknown, and the shared experience, and the delight of surprising ourselves and making it make sense somehow. So laughter, very good for you. And improvised comedy is a great way to have a laugh every week or whatever. There's a good film, Laughology. I'll put a link to it nearby, on the science of laughter. Second is connection. So we're social beings. Connection is healing. Connection helps us regulate. And if we don't get enough of it, we don't feel so great. It can even be bad for us physically. So being isolated or lonely can increase your risk of heart attacks and strokes by about the same amount as light levels of smoking. Probably more complicated than that, but there are measurable health benefits to social isolation, health risks to social isolation. And emotionally, that's true too. So often people will come to a class, or they'll say afterwards, they say, oh, I felt terrible. I almost didn't come today because I wasn't feeling up to it, but I'm so glad I did, because I feel much better now. And we've not talked about the thing that was bothering them at all, but simply being around other people in a positive, fun environment is nourishing for ourselves. We co-regulate. And connection helps us tame our emotional excesses and brings us back to vibrancy. So if your connection bucket is feeling a little bit low, then that's not surprising, right? Like this year in particular, we've been isolated, and actually in the modern world, we're becoming increasingly isolated anyway. This is a more general trend. Through fragmentation in society, getting disconnected from extended families, more people living by themselves, individualism, these are all having an effect. So not surprising if you feel like your connection bucket's a little low and it's leaving you feeling a bit dusty or jaded, then improvised comedy can be one way to fill it quickly, because there's something so intense and beautiful about the connection that we make through play that's much, much deeper than the kind of connections that we make where we're just exchanging information about what your job is, where you live, whether you found a parking space, all that boring stuff. Often in improv, you can have an amazing connection with someone, even though you barely know their name and you've never met before. And then you can engage in an amazing creation together, and then you can get to know each other later, which is a beautiful, wonderful, nourishing thing. The third nourishing aspect of improv for me is surprise. So I call one of my courses the delight of surprising yourself. As children, we're surprised a lot. because we don't have much experience. There's so many things are new. We have that wonder and joy of being shown something completely new. As adults, well, we've seen lots of things before, and also we've often created lives that are predictable and safe and stable, and there are good reasons for that. That's a good thing, but it can come at the cost of things becoming a bit samey and us never finding new things. And it can be so wonderful to do that, like when you create something completely new, or you find yourself saying or doing something in an improv scene that you don't know where it came from. It just like came out of you and you're like, whoa, what was that? And that, to me, that's the beauty of it, is allowing that to come through and recapturing the joy of discovering. And the fourth way I wanted to mention is around challenge and stimulation. So we can feel stressed or not our best selves if we have too much challenge, but we can also feel like that if we don't have enough challenge and stimulation in our lives. So if you have a pet, you know someone who has a pet like a dog, you know that you're not going to keep the dog indoors in the house all day. It needs a sensorially rich environment. So it needs to go for walks, it needs to roll in the grass, it needs to chase balls and squirrels and play with other dogs, and all of those things give it a healthy, full life. And same if you're trying to organize a healthy kind of zoo, right? The animals need enough challenge and stimulation to play out their natural instincts. And the same is true of us. And yet our modern lives often don't have enough kind of variation, enough up or down. They can be a little bit stable, a bit samey. Maybe the only challenge we might get might be intellectual ones, like figuring out an Excel spreadsheet at work or something. And that can be satisfying to do, but it's not the same as like a whole body immersive challenge. That's why if you're feeling a bit dusty or a bit restless, it can feel so good to go for a run or do a workout. And that's challenging, right? And it's giving you lots of physical stimulation. And then afterwards, then you can properly rest and relax because you've been around that curve. It's also why people feel good when they go on holiday, because suddenly they have lots of new stimulation that freshens things up for them. And improvised comedy can be a great way of building in challenge and stimulation into your day in a safe, fun way. So those are some ways where improvised comedy and practicing it can be a support for you and a nourishment for you. And there's another aspect, as I mentioned, which is the way it can offer an opportunity to grow and stretch for some of us. Because I was terrified when I first started doing improv in 2012. I felt very drawn to it, but also terrified of it. And if I tell people I do improv now, one of the most common responses is, "Oh, you're brave." So isn't that interesting that something that we naturally did as children, to be in the moment, do things for it, do it for its own sake, to not worry too much about what it looked like, to create imaginary worlds together and enjoy doing it, that came so naturally to almost all of us as children. And yet for many of us as adults, it now holds a lot of fear. Now, You may have come from a background where your playfulness was supported, but if it wasn't, then you might find this, that it actually feels like a really scary, challenging thing, as it was for me. And there's a reason for this, that if your playfulness wasn't supported and encouraged growing up in particular, then it can begin to feel like something you shouldn't do, something you're supposed to have outgrown. And we disown it. It goes into the category of things that I don't do. And that's as a way of fitting in with our caregivers, with our parents, with our peers. We want to be accepted. So we mold ourselves to fit what is being offered as acceptable. And then there's parts of us that we disown, which you might have heard of the concept of the shadow, right? So shadow is like the parts of us that we've decided we're not going to access anymore. And it's often thought of as being only quite dark things like suppressing our violence or whatever, but it's also where we've disowned our fun, our joy, our creativity, our openness, our freedom, our expressiveness. And if that's happened, then it can be quite a journey and a wonderful, beautiful thing to reclaim that as something that comes back within your range of ways that you allow yourself to be. And it can be a challenging journey a little bit, or at least it can feel a bit scary. And I sometimes say the fear in the absence of danger can be a clue to where your treasure lies. If you have that feeling of like, oh, I'm really attracted to that, but I feel scared of it, that's often a sign that it's part of you that you've disowned. And if you wished, you could make a decision to begin to reclaim that. If you want a mythological way of thinking about it, the hoard of gold is always on the other side of the dragon. You have to go past the dragon to get to the gold and reclaim it for yourself. And if you do, that's what I did, basically. I sometimes call myself the world's least likely improviser, because my background was very much around being clever, getting things right, passing exams, being accurate, and right. That's why I call another one of my workshops is called Letting Go of Right. For that reason, because it's this mind flip from experiencing the world through external parameters of what is either demonstrably, objectively correct, or what is going to get you approval from others, to a world of finding something that's inside yourself and allowing that to come out, which is a big thing for many of us, but a rewarding one to be able to have that option for yourself. I'd say if you're doing that, just a couple of notes, if this is your journey, that to remember that managing your state is part of the journey. So certainly in my classes, we do centering and state management as part of the class, because I recognize that for some people it can feel scary. Second is to work inside your stretch zone. So if you just opt out of everything and play really safe, then you're probably not really, it can be nice and it can be the right choice sometimes, but you're probably not discovering something new. It's like if I did weightlifting with my pen, right? Not much is happening here. but then not to get overwhelmed either. Like some improv classes can be quite a lot, right? And just to know, oh, this is getting a bit too much. So you need to find your stretch zone where you're just going a little bit outside your comfort zone, but it's not too much either. And certainly in my classes, I do my best to calibrate it to the group, so it's not too much, not too little, particularly with beginners. And also everything is optional, so you're very much supported in choosing the right level of engagement for you on that day. And that we practice managing our state as part of the class. It's integral to the process. And if you're going down that path, there are some things to consider that might help you get the best from using improv as a form of personal growth. Cool. So those are my thoughts. So we've distinguished improv for the performance side from the experiential side, and 4 ways in which it can be nourishing and good for our mental health and well-being. So laughter and connection and surprise and stimulation. And also looked at like shadow and perfectionism and being seen, and ways in which it can give us a way to gently prise apart some of the cages that we keep ourselves in, and to free ourselves a little bit more and reclaim some of that, the disowned parts of ourselves, and be kind to ourselves in the process. So yeah, I hope that's been helpful. If you'd like to do like taster class with me or anything, that's great. Find me at playconnect.co.uk. I have courses, and taster class is a good place to start. And yeah, there's also a newsletter, so you can get that there. But otherwise, I hope this has been really helpful, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.